It was a crisp autumn morning at Miami International Airport, where the air buzzed with activity. Ground staff hurriedly pushed luggage carts across the tarmac while private jets lined up for takeoff on the runway. Among them stood Jake Thompson, a wiry mechanic in his late 30s with grease-streaked hands and a baseball cap that had seen better days. Jake wasn't someone who drew attention to himself. He preferred working quietly in the shadows of multi-million-dollar aircraft, fixing problems others couldn't solve. But today, fate had other plans. Jake worked for Skyline Aviation Services, a company known for maintaining some of the most luxurious planes in the world. His job was straightforward: inspect, repair, and ensure every plane left the hangar in perfect condition. That day, however, things took an unexpected turn when he received an urgent call from dispatch. A Billionaire's private jet, a sleek $70 million Gulfstream G650ER, was experiencing engine trouble just moments before departure. The client? None other than Richard Langston III, one of the wealthiest men on the planet. Known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and zero tolerance for delays, Langston demanded perfection. And now, Jake found himself staring down the barrel of what could either be the biggest challenge or the worst mistake of his career. When Jake arrived at the hangar bay, he was greeted by a scene of controlled chaos. Ground crew members milled about nervously, exchanging worried glances as they tried not to look directly at the towering figure pacing near the jet's boarding stairs. Richard Langston III was dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit, but his face was red with barely contained fury. "What's taking so long?" He barked into his phone, clearly unsatisfied with whatever answer he was receiving. Nearby, two pilots stood stiffly beside their flight logs, looking like schoolboys caught cheating on a test. Everyone knew this wasn't just any malfunction, it was the malfunction. If Langston missed his scheduled meeting in Geneva due to mechanical issues, heads would roll. Ignoring the tension in the air, Jake approached the jet with his toolbox in hand. He didn't need drama. He needed focus. Climbing into the cockpit, he began running diagnostics on the engines. At first glance, everything seemed fine. The gauges showed normal readings and there were no obvious warning lights flashing. Yet, something felt off. It reminded him of a time years ago when he'd fixed a car only to discover later that the real issue lay hidden beneath the layers of wiring. Determined not to repeat past mistakes, Jake decided to dig deeper. As he pried open access panels and traced electrical connections, Jake uncovered the source of the problem. A tiny sensor buried deep within the engine housing had short-circuited. On its own, it might have gone unnoticed, but combined with recent software updates installed by another team, it created a cascade effect that threatened to shut down both engines mid-flight. The realization hit Jake like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. It was a potential catastrophe waiting to happen. Had the jet taken off without repairs, the outcome could have been disastrous. But identifying the issue was only half the battle. Replacing the faulty sensor required precision and patience, neither of which came easily under pressure. With Langston growing increasingly agitated outside, how much longer is this going to take? Jake forced himself to tune out the noise and concentrate. Using specialized tools, he carefully removed the damaged component and replaced it with a new one, double-checking each connection before moving on to the next step. Time ticked away mercilessly, yet Jake remained calm, his movements steady and deliberate. He'd spent over 15 years honing his craft, and this moment was no different. Sweat dripped down his forehead, but he didn't stop until the final bolt was tightened. After nearly 3 hours of painstaking work, Jake finally emerged from the jet, wiping his hands on a rag. "It's fixed," he announced simply, though his tone carried the weight of someone who understood the gravity of the situation. Relief washed over the ground crew, and even Langston seemed momentarily speechless. For once, the billionaire didn't complain. Instead, he nodded curtly and boarded the plane without another word. As the engines roared to life and the jet taxied toward the runway, Jake allowed himself a small smile. Another day, another crisis averted. Yet, unbeknownst to Jake, his actions hadn't gone unnoticed. Inside the cabin, Langston sat silently, watching the mechanic through the window as the jet prepared for takeoff. There was something about the man's quiet confidence, his ability to remain composed under immense pressure, that intrigued the billionaire. Most people crumbled under Langston's glare, but Jake had handled the situation with professionalism and skill. Perhaps there was more to this grease-stained mechanic than met the eye. Hours later, after landing safely in Geneva, Langston made a decision. He instructed his assistant to reach out to Skyline Aviation Services and request Jake's contact information. What started as a routine repair job had sparked an idea in Langston's mind, an idea that could change Jake's life forever. Meanwhile, back in Miami, Jake returned home exhausted but satisfied. Little did he know, his ordinary existence was about to collide with extraordinary opportunities, all because he'd chosen to do his job, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. For now, though, Jake settled into his modest apartment, cracking open a cold soda as he replayed the events of the day in his head. Fixing planes was what he did best, and he took pride in knowing he'd saved lives, even if those lives belonged to someone as intimidating as Richard Langston III. Still, as he leaned back on his couch and closed his eyes, part of him wondered if, maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of the story. After all, sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest changes. Jake Thompson woke up the next morning feeling like any other day. The sun streamed through his bedroom window, casting warm, golden light over the cluttered space. Tools hung neatly on pegboards, and a half-finished model airplane sat on his workbench, a project he'd been meaning to complete for months. Life was simple for Jake. Wake up, go to work, fix planes, come home, repeat. But today, something felt different. It wasn't the kind of difference you could put your finger on. It was more like a subtle shift in the air, as if the universe had nudged him slightly off course without telling him why. By mid-afternoon, Jake found himself back at Skyline Aviation Services, knee-deep in another round of maintenance checks. This time he was inspecting a corporate jet scheduled to depart for New York later that evening. As he leaned under the wing to examine an oil leak, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw an unfamiliar number flash across the screen. Normally, Jake ignored calls from unknown numbers. They were usually telemarketers or automated messages. But something about this one made him pause. Maybe it was curiosity or maybe it was instinct. Either way, he answered. "Hello?" Jake said cautiously, wiping grease-streaked hands on his coveralls. "Mr. Thompson?" came a crisp, professional voice on the other end. "This is Margaret Hensley, personal assistant to Mr. Richard Langston III. Jake froze. His mind raced back to the events of the previous day, the billionaire's jet, the faulty sensor, the pressure cooker situation on the tarmac. He hadn't expected to hear from Langston again, let alone receive a call directly from his assistant. What did they want? Was this about the repair? Had he missed something? "Yes, this is Jake," he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "How can I help you?" Ms. Hensley wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Langston would like to speak with you regarding your recent service on his aircraft. Are you available for a video conference tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. EST? Jake blinked, caught off guard. A video conference? With Richard Langston III? Surely there must be some mistake. Mechanics didn't get invited to meetings with billionaires unless they'd messed something up. And Jake was confident he hadn't. Still, saying no didn't seem like an option. Sure, Jake stammered. "I'll be there." "Excellent," Ms. Hensley said smoothly. "Details will follow via email. Have a good evening, Mr. Thompson." Before Jake could respond, the line went dead. He stared at his phone for a moment, replaying the conversation in his head. Then, shaking off the surreal feeling, he slipped the device back into his pocket and returned to the task at hand. If anything, fixing jets was familiar territory. Talking to billionaires? Not so much. The next morning, Jake sat nervously in front of his laptop, wearing the cleanest shirt he owned and combing his hair with water to make it look presentable. At exactly 9 a.m., the screen lit up with a video call request. Taking a deep breath, he accepted it. The face that appeared on the monitor belonged to none other than Richard Langston III himself. Gone was the agitated man pacing the tarmac. Instead, Langston looked calm, composed, and intensely focused. Behind him, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes hinted at wealth and intellect. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Langston began, his voice carrying the same authority Jake remembered but tinged now with curiosity. "Thank you for making time to speak with me." "No problem, sir," Jake replied, forcing a smile. "What can I do for you?" Langston leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze locking onto Jake's. "Let's cut to the chase. Yesterday, you demonstrated exceptional skill and composure under pressure. Most people would have crumbled given the circumstances, yet you remained steady and resolved. That kind of temperament is rare and valuable." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Compliments weren't something he heard often, especially not from someone like Langston. "I just did my job, sir," he muttered humbly. "That may be true," Langston acknowledged, "but not everyone does their job as well as you did. Which brings me to my proposal." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I'm in the process of expanding my business ventures into aerospace technology. To succeed, I need individuals who understand machinery inside and out, people who can think critically, solve problems creatively, and adapt quickly. People like you." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Was Langston offering him a job? The thought seemed absurd, almost laughable. Sure, he was good at what he did, but working for a billionaire in aerospace development, that was a whole new level of responsibility, one he wasn't sure he was ready for. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Langston," Jake said carefully, "but I'm just a mechanic. I don't know anything about running a business or developing cutting-edge tech." Langston chuckled softly, a rare glimpse of humanity breaking through his polished exterior. "You underestimate yourself, Mr. Thompson. Skills like yours are transferable. Besides, I'm not asking you to lead the company. I'm asking you to join my team. Your role would involve overseeing technical operations, ensuring quality control, and troubleshooting complex issues. You'd also have access to resources most mechanics only dream of. Think of it as taking your expertise to the next level." For a moment, silence hung between them. Jake stared at the screen, his mind racing. On one hand, this was an opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to step out of the shadows and make a real impact. On the other hand, it meant leaving behind everything familiar, his routine, his coworkers, his comfort zone. Could he handle the pressure? Did he even want to try? Finally, Jake spoke. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Langston replied, nodding approvingly. "Take all the time you need. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often." With that, the call ended, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. Over the next few hours, he weighed the pros and cons, imagining what life might look like if he accepted Langston's offer. Would he thrive in such a high-stakes environment, or would he crash and burn? And what about his current job? Skyline Aviation Services had been his second home for years. Leaving wouldn't just mean walking away from a paycheck. It would mean saying goodbye to the people who had become family. As dusk fell, Jake decided to take a walk to clear his head. Miami's streets buzzed with energy, the neon lights reflecting off puddles left by an afternoon rainstorm. Passing by a park, he noticed a group of kids playing soccer, their laughter echoing through the cool evening air. Watching them reminded him of simpler times, of chasing dreams without worrying about failure. Maybe that's what Langston was offering, a chance to chase a bigger dream even if it scared him. By the time Jake returned home, he'd made up his mind. Picking up his phone, he dialed the number Ms. Hensley had provided earlier. "Hello?" Her voice answered after a couple of rings. "It's Jake Thompson," he said, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "Tell Mr. Langston I'm in." 2 weeks later, Jake found himself standing in the lobby of Langston Industries headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Miami. Clad in a brand new suit that still felt awkward against his skin, he clutched a folder containing his resume and certifications. Around him, employees bustled about. their polished appearances and confident strides making him feel woefully out of place. For a fleeting second, doubt crept in. What had he gotten himself into? But then, Margaret Hensley appeared, ushering him toward a private elevator reserved for executives. As the doors slid shut and the car ascended to the top floor, Jake reminded himself of why he was here. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was someone capable of rising to challenges, solving impossible problems and proving himself when it mattered most. Whatever awaited him upstairs, he was ready. When the elevator doors opened, Jake stepped into a world unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city skyline, while state-of-the-art equipment filled every corner of the expansive workspace. In the center of it all stood Richard Langston III, waiting with a faint smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson," he said, extending a hand. "Let's build something extraordinary." And for the first time in his life, Jake believed he actually could. Jake Thompson's first day at Langston Industries was a whirlwind of introductions, orientations, and overwhelming impressions. The sleek office building felt more like a spaceship than a workplace, with its glass walls, touchscreen panels, and employees who seemed to glide effortlessly from one task to another. Jake couldn't help but feel like an outsider, a mechanic in a world of suits and polished shoes. But Richard Langston III had made it clear, Jake wasn't hired for his ability to blend in. He was there because he could fix things others couldn't. Margaret Hensley led Jake through the labyrinthine corridors of the headquarters, introducing him to key members of the team. There was Dr. Elena Carter, the lead aerospace engineer whose sharp mind and no-nonsense attitude commanded respect. Then came Marcus Reed, a young tech prodigy who spoke faster than Jake could think, spouting jargon about quantum computing and nanotechnology. Finally, there was Victoria Lane, the company's head of operations, whose warm smile put Jake slightly at ease despite her intimidating title. Each of them greeted him politely, though Jake sensed a mix of curiosity and skepticism in their eyes. After all, what could a grease-stained mechanic possibly contribute to cutting-edge aerospace innovation? The tour ended in a massive workshop on the lower level, where prototypes of futuristic aircraft were being assembled. It was here that Jake finally felt a flicker of familiarity. Tools lined the walls, machines hummed softly, and the smell of oil and metal filled the air. This was his element, the place where he belonged. Margaret handed him a tablet loaded with schematics, blueprints, and project timelines before leaving him with Dr. Carter. "Welcome to the team," Elena said, extending a hand. "I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how you'd fit into this operation when Mr. Langston mentioned bringing you aboard. But after seeing your work on the G650ER, I'm willing to give you a shot." Jake nodded, grateful for the olive branch. "Thanks, I won't let you down." Elena smirked. "You'd better not. We've got big plans and failure isn't an option." Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into his new role. His days began with early morning meetings in Langston's executive suite, where the billionaire outlined ambitious goals for the company. Projects ranged from developing hypersonic passenger jets to designing autonomous drones capable of delivering supplies to remote areas. While Jake didn't fully understand the science behind some of these ideas, he quickly realized that his expertise lay in bridging the gap between theory and practice. When engineers encountered mechanical hurdles they couldn't solve, Jake stepped in, using his hands-on experience to troubleshoot and refine designs. One project in particular captured Jake's attention. Project Horizon, a prototype supersonic jet designed to travel from New York to Tokyo in under 2 hours. The plane was revolutionary, boasting advanced materials, AI-driven navigation systems, and engines powerful enough to break the sound barrier without creating sonic booms. But as impressive as it sounded on paper, the reality was far messier. During test runs, the engine turbines overheated, causing frequent shutdowns. Engineers scrambled to find solutions, but nothing worked. Not until Jake suggested modifying the cooling system based on a technique he'd used to repair race cars. His idea was met with raised eyebrows. "That's unconventional," Elena admitted, studying the proposed changes. "But desperate times call for desperate measures. Let's try it." With the team's approval, Jake spent long hours in the workshop, reconfiguring the turbine housing and installing custom heat-resistant components. When the modified engine was tested, it performed flawlessly. For the first time since joining the company, Jake felt a sense of belonging. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a problem solver, a critical part of something groundbreaking. Despite his growing confidence, Jake struggled to adapt to the corporate culture. Meetings stretched for hours, filled with PowerPoint, presentations and debates over minutiae that seemed irrelevant to him. Lunch breaks were awkward affairs, with colleagues discussing stock prices and luxury vacations, while Jake quietly ate a sandwich from the cafeteria. Even worse was the constant pressure to innovate. At Skyline Aviation Services, success was measured by whether a plane took off safely. Here, failure meant falling behind competitors and losing billions of dollars in the process. Langston himself added to the tension. Though he'd been supportive during Jake's transition, the billionaire's expectations were sky-high. Every milestone had to be met ahead of schedule, every challenge overcome with precision. One evening, as Jake stayed late to fine-tune a component for Project Horizon, Langston appeared unexpectedly. "How's it going?" Langston asked, leaning against the doorway. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and turned to face him. "Good, sir. Just making sure everything's perfect before tomorrow's test flight." Langston nodded approvingly. "Perfection is non-negotiable. Remember, we're not just building planes. We're reshaping the future of transportation. If we succeed, we'll change the way people live, work, and connect. That's worth any sacrifice." Jake forced a smile, though Langston's words weighed heavily on him. Sacrifice was one thing, but the relentless pace was taking its toll. Late nights blurred into early mornings, and the line between work and personal life disappeared entirely. Calls from friends went unanswered, and weekends became a distant memory. For the first time, Jake questioned whether he'd made the right decision. The breaking point came during a high-stakes demonstration for potential investors. Project Horizon was scheduled to make its public debut, showcasing its record-breaking speed and efficiency. Everything hinged on the event's success. If the jet failed, so would Langston's vision. As the countdown began, Jake stood nervously on the sidelines, watching as technicians prepared the aircraft. Despite countless tests, he couldn't shake the gnawing fear that something might go wrong. And then it did. Seconds after takeoff, alarms blared inside the control room. Data streams showed erratic readings from the fuel injection system, threatening to stall the engines. Panic rippled through the crowd as pilots attempted to stabilize the jet. Back on the ground, engineers frantically analyzed the issue, but no one could pinpoint the cause. Jake sprang into action. Grabbing a toolkit, he sprinted toward the runway, ignoring shouts from security guards trying to stop him. Reaching the jet as it taxied back to the hangar, he climbed aboard and headed straight for the engine compartment. Time slowed as he traced wires and inspected connections, searching for the source of the malfunction. Sweat dripped down his face, but his focus never wavered. Finally, he found it, a loose valve hidden deep within the system. With trembling hands, Jake tightened the connection and reset the fuel flow. Moments later, the engines roared back to life, steadier than ever. Climbing out of the jet, Jake gave a thumbs up to the control tower. The test resumed, and this time, Project Horizon soared flawlessly, leaving spectators awestruck. As applause erupted around him, Jake collapsed onto the tarmac, exhausted but triumphant. Langston approached, clapping him on the shoulder. "You saved us again, Mr. Thompson. I knew I made the right choice hiring you." Jake managed a weak smile, too, drained to respond. But deep down, he felt something shift. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling. And for the first time, he truly believed he was exactly where he was meant to be. That night, Jake returned home to find a message waiting on his phone. It was from an old friend inviting him to grab dinner sometime. Smiling, Jake replied, promising to catch up soon. Life was changing fast, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep a piece of his old self intact, even in this new world. The success of Project Horizon catapulted Langston Industries into the global spotlight. News outlets hailed Richard Langston III as a visionary, while tech enthusiasts marveled at the groundbreaking technology behind the supersonic jet. Investors lined up to pour money into the company, and orders for future models began flooding in. For Jake Thompson, however, the aftermath of the demonstration brought both triumph and turmoil. On one hand, he was celebrated as a hero within Langston Industries. Team members who had once doubted his abilities now looked to him with newfound respect. Dr. Elena Carter openly praised his ingenuity during team meetings, crediting him for saving the project when it mattered most. Even Marcus Reed, the young prodigy who rarely acknowledged anyone outside his own circle, started seeking Jake's input on technical challenges. But despite the recognition, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The relentless pace of work continued unabated, leaving little room for rest or reflection. Nights blurred together as deadlines loomed, and the pressure to maintain perfection became suffocating. One evening, after yet another marathon session in the workshop, Jake found himself sitting alone in the dimly lit hangar. Tools lay scattered around him, and the prototype jet stood silently in the corner, a monument to human ambition but also a reminder of the sacrifices demanded by greatness. He stared at it blankly, his mind racing with questions. Was all this worth it? Had he traded simplicity for stress without realizing what he'd lost along the way? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. Looking up, he saw Victoria Lane approaching, her heels clicking softly against the concrete floor. She carried 2 cups of coffee, offering one to Jake, with a sympathetic smile. "You look like you could use this," she said, handing him the steaming mug. Jake accepted it gratefully, taking a cautious sip before responding. "Thanks. I guess I needed a break." Victoria sat down beside him, crossing her legs neatly. "You've been pushing yourself too hard, Jake. Everyone notices. It's not healthy." He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's part of the job, isn't it? If we don't push ourselves, someone else will." "True," Victoria replied, thoughtfully. "But there's a difference between dedication and burnout. You've already proven yourself time and again. Don't let this place consume you." Her words struck a chord deep within Jake. He thought back to the days when fixing planes was just about solving problems, not about pleasing billionaires or impressing shareholders. Somewhere along the line, he'd forgotten why he loved his craft in the first place. The realization left him uneasy, yet strangely hopeful. Maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim some semblance of balance. Over the following weeks, Jake made a conscious effort to slow down. He began setting boundaries, refusing to stay late every night unless absolutely necessary. During lunch breaks, he ventured out of the office instead of eating alone in the workshop, exploring nearby parks and cafes. Slowly but surely, he rediscovered pieces of himself that had been buried under layers of stress and responsibility. One Saturday afternoon, Jake decided to visit a local auto repair shop owned by an old friend named Carlos. The two had worked together years ago before their paths diverged, and Jake hadn't seen him since starting at Langston Industries. Walking into the garage felt like stepping back in time. The smell of motor oil, the clanging of wrenches, and the easy banter among mechanics created a comforting sense of familiarity. Carlos greeted him warmly, pulling him into a bear hug. "Jake, long time no see, man. What brings you here?" "I just wanted to check in," Jake admitted, leaning against a workbench. "Things have been intense lately." Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Intense how? You're working for a billionaire? No, right? Isn't that supposed to be glamorous?" Jake chuckled wryly. "Not exactly. It's more complicated than I expected." As they talked, Jake shared snippets of his life at Langston Industries, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. Carlos listened intently, nodding occasionally, but mostly letting Jake vent. By the end of the conversation, Jake felt lighter, as if sharing his struggles had lifted a weight off his shoulders. "You know," Carlos said finally, wiping grease-streaked hands on a rag, "you might be living in a different world now, but don't lose sight of who you are. The guy who can fix anything, that's your superpower. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Jake nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. For the first time in months, he felt grounded. No matter where life took him, he resolved never to abandon the core of what made him special. Back at Langston Industries, things were evolving rapidly. With Project Horizon gaining momentum, Richard Langston III announced plans to expand the company's reach beyond aviation. New divisions focused on space exploration, renewable energy, and artificial intelligence were being established, each requiring innovative solutions and cutting-edge designs. Jake found himself thrust into leadership roles, overseeing teams of engineers and technicians tasked with bringing these ambitious ideas to life. At first, the added responsibilities overwhelmed him. Managing people was far different from fixing machines, and Jake struggled to adapt to the interpersonal dynamics involved. Conflicts arose frequently, with team members clashing over creative differences or competing priorities. Yet, amidst the chaos, Jake discovered strengths he hadn't known he possessed. His ability to listen patiently, mediate disputes, and find practical solutions earned him the trust of those around him. One particularly challenging project involved developing a fleet of autonomous delivery drones capable of navigating dense urban environments. Early prototypes crashed repeatedly during test flights, prompting frustration among engineers. Jake stepped in, suggesting modifications based on lessons learned from traditional aircraft design. By combining modern AI algorithms with tried and true mechanical principles, the team eventually produced a drone that performed flawlessly. Its success marked another milestone for Langston Industries, and another victory for Jake. Despite his growing confidence, Jake remained acutely aware of the toll his career was taking on his personal life. Friends and family continued reaching out sporadically, though their invitations often went unanswered due to work commitments. One day, while scrolling through unread messages on his phone, Jake came across an email from his younger sister, Sarah. They had always been close, but distance and busy schedules had strained their relationship over the years. The subject line read simply, "Missing you." Opening the message, Jake read heartfelt words expressing concern for his well-being and longing for connection. Sarah reminded him of childhood memories spent tinkering with broken appliances in their parents' garage, moments filled with laughter and camaraderie. She ended the email with a simple plea, "Come home soon, even if it's just for a weekend. We miss you." Tears welled up in Jake's eyes as he reread the message multiple times. In his quest for professional success, he had neglected the people who mattered most. Determined to make amends, he requested leave from Langston Industries and booked a flight to his hometown. When Jake arrived, Sarah greeted him with open arms, hugging him tightly as if afraid he might disappear again. Over homemade meals and long walks through familiar streets, they reconnected, sharing stories and catching up on lost time. Jake realized how much he had missed, not just his family, but also the quiet joys of everyday life. Conversations flowed effortlessly, unburdened by corporate jargon or high-stakes decisions. By the time Jake returned to Miami, he carried a renewed sense of purpose. Success wasn't measured solely by accolades or achievements. It was also about nurturing relationships and staying true to oneself. As he walked back into Langston Industries, ready to tackle whatever challenges lay ahead, Jake knew he was no longer just a mechanic or an employee. He was a person striving to balance ambition with authenticity. And perhaps that was the greatest accomplishment of all. Months passed, and Jake Thompson settled into a rhythm that balanced his professional ambitions with personal fulfillment. The lessons he'd learned from reconnecting with his family and himself had reshaped how he approached both life and work. At Langston Industries, he became not just a problem solver, but also a mentor, guiding younger engineers through challenges while reminding them to value simplicity and practicality over complexity. His reputation grew beyond the company walls, earning him recognition in industry circles as someone who bridged innovation with reliability. Richard Langston III noticed the shift in Jake's demeanor too. Where once there had been hesitation and self-doubt, now stood confidence tempered by wisdom. Impressed by Jake's leadership during several high-profile projects, Langston began entrusting him with even greater responsibilities. One evening, after wrapping up a particularly demanding week, Langston invited Jake to join him for dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking Biscayne Bay. As they sat on the terrace, sipping wine and watching the city lights dance across the water, Langston leaned back in his chair, studying Jake thoughtfully. "You've come a long way since I first called you," he said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I knew you were talented, but I didn't expect you to grow so much, not just professionally, but personally." Jake smiled modestly, swirling the remnants of his drink. "I guess it's been a learning experience for me too. When I started here, I felt like I was playing catch-up all the time, but somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't have to lose myself to succeed." Langston nodded approvingly. "That's rare these days. Most people either burn out or compromise their values trying to keep up. You've managed to stay grounded despite everything. That's why I wanted to talk to you tonight." Curiosity flickered in Jake's eyes. "About what?" Langston placed his glass on the table and folded his hands together. "I'm planning to step back from day-to-day operations. My focus is shifting toward philanthropy and long-term visioning for the company. What I need is someone capable of leading Langston Industries forward, a person who understands the importance of balance between progress and humanity." Jake blinked, taken aback. "Are you saying—" "Yes," Langston interrupted with a small smile. "I want you to take over as CEO." For a moment, Jake couldn't speak. The idea seemed absurd, almost laughable. Him, a mechanic-turned-engineer running one of the most influential companies in the world? Yet, as the initial shock wore off, he realized Langston wasn't joking. This wasn't about titles or prestige. It was about trust. Langston believed in him, flaws and all. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like this," Jake admitted honestly. "Being CEO sounds overwhelming." "It won't be easy," Langston agreed. "But no one ever said changing the world would be simple. And let's face it, you've already proven you can handle pressure better than most." Jake mulled over the offer silently, weighing the risks and rewards. On one hand, accepting meant stepping fully into the unknown, leaving behind the comfort of hands-on work for strategic decision-making. On the other hand, it offered an opportunity to shape the future, to ensure that technology served humanity rather than overshadowed it. After a few minutes, he looked Langston in the eye and nodded. "I'll do it," he said firmly. "But only if we agree on one thing. The company stays true to its mission. Innovation should improve lives, not complicate them." Langston grinned, raising his glass. "Deal." Jake's transition into the role of CEO marked a new chapter for Langston Industries. Under his leadership, the company prioritized sustainability, ethical practices, and community engagement alongside technological advancement. Projects expanded beyond aerospace to include initiatives aimed at addressing global challenges like climate change, healthcare access, and education inequality. Jake encouraged collaboration across departments, fostering a culture where creativity thrived without sacrificing accountability. One such initiative involved partnering with local schools to inspire the next generation of innovators. Jake launched a program called Flight Path, offering students hands-on workshops in engineering, robotics, and aviation design. For many participants, it was their first exposure to STEM fields, and for some, it sparked lifelong passions. Seeing young faces light up with excitement reminded Jake of his own childhood tinkering in his parents' garage, dreaming of possibilities. Meanwhile, Jake continued nurturing relationships outside of work. He made regular visits home, ensuring he stayed connected to his family. Sarah teased him endlessly about his fancy suits and polished shoes, but she never let him forget where he came from. "You may be CEO now," she joked during one visit, "but you'll always be my grease monkey brother." Back in Miami, Jake found solace in quiet moments spent fishing off the pier near his apartment. It was a hobby he'd picked up recently, drawn to the simplicity of casting a line and waiting patiently for a bite. Sometimes Elena Carter joined him, sharing stories about her own journey as a woman in STEM. Their friendship deepened over shared laughter and mutual respect, proving that even amidst busy schedules, meaningful connections could flourish. Despite his successes, Jake faced challenges as CEO. Critics questioned whether a mechanic-turned-leader was qualified to helm. a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Competitors sought to undermine Langston Industries' dominance, launching aggressive campaigns to steal market share. Internally, some employees struggled to adapt to Jake's emphasis on teamwork and transparency, preferring traditional hierarchical structures. Through it all, Jake relied on the same principles that had guided him since day one: perseverance, humility, and a steadfast belief in doing what was right. He surrounded himself with trusted advisors, including Elena and Marcus, whose expertise complemented his own. Together, they navigated crises, celebrated victories, and laid the groundwork for a brighter future. One particularly memorable moment occurred during a global summit on sustainable aviation. Standing before an audience of industry leaders, policymakers, and environmental activists, Jake delivered a speech outlining Langston Industries' commitment to reducing carbon emissions and promoting eco-friendly travel solutions. As he concluded, applause erupted throughout the auditorium, echoing louder than any standing ovation he'd ever experienced. Afterward, Richard Langston III approached him, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're making me proud, Jake. Keep going. You're exactly where you're meant to be." Years later, when Jake reflected on his journey, he marveled at how far he'd come. From fixing planes in a hangar to leading a company shaping the future of transportation, every twist and turn had taught him invaluable lessons. Success hadn't erased the struggles, it had simply given him tools to overcome them. Late one evening, as Jake walked through the empty halls of Langston Industries, he paused to admire the prototypes displayed proudly in glass cases. Each one represented countless hours of hard work, collaboration, and ingenuity, yet none of them compared to the greatest achievement of all: staying true to himself while striving to make the world a better place. As he locked up for the night, Jake stepped outside into the cool Miami air. Above him, stars twinkled against the velvet sky, reminding him of infinite possibilities. Somewhere among those constellations lay dreams yet unimagined, and he was ready to chase them, one step at a time.